All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating theological puzzles out there. It's a mystery that might be hidden between the very first two verses of the Bible. So let me just start with a pretty wild idea. What if the creation story we all know isn't the original story? What if it's actually a divine reboot of a world that was almost completely erased from history? The heart of this whole mystery really lies in the whiplash you get reading the Bible's first two sentences. I mean, we go from absolute perfection to complete chaos in a single breath. It's so abrupt it almost feels like a page, or maybe a whole chapter, was just torn out. Okay, so where's the evidence for a hidden story like this? Well, proponents of what's called the gap theory say it's been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right there in the opening lines of Genesis. So, verse 1 describes this perfect creation, right? A divine masterpiece. But then, the very next verse paints a picture of complete and utter desolation. So the question is, how do we get from a perfect creation to total chaos in, what, a sentence? Well, the key, they say, is in the original Hebrew. The words we translate as without form and void are actually tohu vabohu. Now, this doesn't mean raw material or, a blank slate waiting to be painted. It means devastation, a ruin. It's the language you'd use to describe the aftermath of a catastrophe. And this is where it gets really compelling. See, everywhere else in the Bible, tohu vabohu is always used to describe the result of divine judgment. It describes a land laid waste by God's wrath. It's the language of tragic endings, not creative beginnings. We're told God isn't the author of confusion, but of order. So what or who caused all this chaos? So if it was a judgment, what on earth happened in that gap between verse 1 and verse 2? This is where the gap theory really opens up a world we were maybe never meant to forget. So the theory basically proposes this timeline. First, an original, perfect Earth was created, probably overseen by angelic beings. Then, a catastrophic rebellion led by Lucifer brings total devastation to this world. God's judgment is what results in that tohu vabohu state we see in verse 2. And then, starting in verse 3, the six-day story we know isn't a creation from nothing, it's a recreation, a restoration of something that was totally destroyed. Now, this theory also suggests that this pre-Adamic world wasn't empty. It was populated by beings whose actions actually triggered this entire cosmic reset in the first place. You see, some ancient texts, like the Book of Enoch, which is actually preserved in the Ethiopian Bible, they say that 200 angelic beings called Watchers came down to Earth. They were supposed to be heavenly stewards, just keeping an eye on things. But these Watchers, called the sons of God in Genesis, they didn't just watch. They abandoned their post. They crossed a forbidden boundary, took human wives, and started sharing heavenly secrets, things like advanced warfare and sorcery. Knowledge humanity was just never meant to have. And this unholy union of divine beings and human women produced a hybrid race, the Nephilim. Their name actually comes from the Hebrew word nephal, which means to fall. They were, quite literally, the fallen ones. Now, the existence of these hybrids, this corruption of the very blueprint of humanity, it posed an existential threat. And that kind of threat required a drastic, world-altering solution. And this is where the story of Noah gets a really fascinating twist. The Bible makes a very specific point about him, and the key word here isn't just righteous, it's generations. It's a hint that his purity went way beyond just his actions. Which brings us to another one of those crucial Hebrew words, tamim. It's translated as blameless here, but this word doesn't just mean morally good. It implies physical and genetic purity. In fact, it's the exact same word used to describe a sacrificial lamb without any blemish. The implication is huge. Noah's bloodline was genetically pure, uncontaminated by the Nephilim. This totally reframes the story of the flood, right? Suddenly, it wasn't just about punishing bad behavior. It was a cosmic quarantine. It was a divine surgical act to cleanse the earth of a corrupted genome and preserve humanity's original blueprint through Noah and his family. So, if you follow that line of thinking, it completely changes how we look at Adam's purpose. He wasn't the first being on a blank slate of a world. He was the start of a new plan on a planet that was already haunted by its past. I mean, think about it. Adam was intimately formed from the dust from an earth that may have already been cursed, and he was placed in Eden. What if Eden wasn't just a paradise, but a kind of divine headquarters, a front line from which to start reclaiming the world? His mission was basically a form of spiritual warfare, to be a priest king who would push back the darkness that came before him.
But as we all know, that's not how the story went. Adam failed his mission, he failed to guard the garden, and that failure set the stage for the next chapter in this cosmic conflict. And this is where scripture draws this incredibly powerful parallel. You have the first Adam, who came from the dust and failed. And then you have the last Adam, Christ, who came from glory to finally fulfill that original mission. Where the first Adam failed to defend Eden, the last Adam came to reclaim it for good. So according to this whole theory, this ancient story was never meant to be just history. It's the essential backstory. It's the setup for a conflict that continues today, a spiritual battle against the exact same cosmic powers that plunged that first Earth into darkness.
So what does this all mean for us? Well, it suggests the war for creation is real, that the kingdom is coming, and that a world once lost is waiting to be reclaimed. The story didn't end with the flood, it didn't end with Adam. It continues right now, which really just leaves one final question.